episode, I interview Gavin Fernie Jones, founder of One Tree at a Time and Reaction. We cover a number of topics from creating communities, creative thinking, leadership, and the challenges of funding and quantifying impact through measurements. Gav joins me from France, where he lives in the Alps and discusses how both the tangible change in climate he has seen while living there and his background working in ski boot rental led him to create One Tree at a Time, and how that has become an integral part of the community. Part of what they do at One Tree at a Time is to patch over branded ski wear to extend the product life and reduce barriers to sport. And through his work at Reaction, he's created a community of changemakers all over the world working to drive positive change.
It started with the first Brexit day, actually, was the real kickoff. So we was in the resort in the shops, and we knew that the following week was going to be a few weeks away was going to be really quiet, because the Friday was going to be the first day that Brexit was meant to happen, and loads of people had decided not to come on holiday because people believed that flights were going to get cancelled. So we knew the resort was going to be pretty quiet, and we wanted to do something a bit fun and positive, because for us living out here at the time, we still didn't know exactly where we stood. So we decided to hold this repair day outside the shop, and it started with the idea of just fixing and repairing clothing. So we got a couple of friends to set up the sewing machines and to do some repairs. And then about 2 weeks before the day, I said to a few of my mates, I said, "Oh, why don't we sell secondhand clothing? So if you've got any ski gear that you don't use anymore, bring it and we'll sell it, and then we'll just take all the funds that we raise from that to plant as many trees as possible." And so we did that, and it was pretty crazy, because there was people turning up and giving us 5 pairs of ski pants, and you knew full well that they had 2 more at home that they were going to keep, sort of thing. And all this stuff came to us, and we actually managed to raise €9,000 just selling off all this secondhand sports gear. All of that went to tree planting, which is lovely to think that we've done that. It would have been helpful to have had some of that to build what we've now been trying to build, but that was fine. That was the premise for that day and that event. And we planned with a company called Trees of the Future, which are a brilliant organisation that are actually cited by the UN for how we should plant trees. And they go and work with a community in Africa, and they plant what they call it. They go and work with a community, and they take an arable piece of land that maybe has got a monocrop on it. And the first 2 years they plant fast-growing trees, and they plant a living hedge around the outside. And what that does is it puts loads of moisture and nutrients into that land, and keeps the water in, and stops the land from blowing away during high winds and stuff. And in year 3 and 4, they then go and introduce vegetables and crops, and they actually increase the yield by 400% on the land. So they're never talking about carbon emission capture and anything like that. They're just talking about creating food security for people, and that also makes people realise in those communities that those trees are really important. So we did that through them. We still keep planting with that charity, and they're really cool. And after the event, we'd been doing quite a few things locally in the space. So in the shop, we'd been switching to renewable energy from our electricity supply. We've been talking to all the brands. We actually created a plastic-free footbed that we developed ourselves. Been doing all this, and then just a few other local businesses sort of said, "Oh, is there a way for us to get involved?" And we created One Tree at a Time. And basically, we created a pledge system for local business to pledge to, so things that they would do within their organisation. And my neighbour at the time was a Kiwi guy who had a master's in environmental sciences, I think it was, and he put this whole pledge together, and businesses got involved. And then after a while, I got more drawn into the community aspect. I was enjoying doing the business stuff. I was more enjoying the community aspect of One Tree at a Time, which was getting to meet people, share ideas, teach each other, repair. Whenever we throw repair events or anything like that, when we put events on, they're often a lot of people come to the events, and it's quite hard when Patagonia do like the warm wear days, there's only a certain amount of really high quality, decent repairs that they can do in a day. When we do repair day, they're not as good a quality, but we can do a lot more. And often we try and get people involved. So we'll be like, right, you need that zip repairing. Well, here's an unpicker. I'm going to show you how to unpick a zip. You finish unpicking the rest of it. So it was that kind of thing that I was enjoying, like the way that we were like teaching and like the way the space, like the way the organization was growing within the community. So after another couple of years, we managed to open a community space in our local village, which is completely self-funded. It's funded by all the waste that is left in our community from skiing, essentially. Most of that is uniforms. So most of that is like ski gear uniforms from companies and ski schools. And what we do is we receive that gear, we service it, we give it a clean if it needs it. And then we actually patch over the old logos so that those garments can go out for resale. And then if you walk into the space, when you go through the door, like there's just the main thing you'll see when you go through is like a really big workstation and desk and workshop. And on that desk, we'll teach sewing lessons, we'll teach bike servicing lessons in the shop. We'll sit down. Customers will come in and sit down and just use the sewing machine. Like I quite often walk in there and like what I've tried to do is like I've tried to keep a distance from what the space becomes and what the space is, and that's because one, I am as the president, I'm just a volunteer, so I can't devote. I love being in that space. I love doing, I have to do the boring stuff like all the paperwork and all the accounts, and I'd like to be more involved in the fun stuff, but I just don't have the time or space to do all that. So what's happened is we've got a couple of members of staff that work in that space that are just incredible, amazing people, really creative, and I've kind of just left them now to make the space into whatever they want to make it into. And quite often I'll come in and Zelia, she's really, really cool. She's got all her mates in there and they're doing a load of ironing because they've got some ironing to do. Like one of them doing some artwork. They've got some tea on the go from like that they've been one of them's collected from all the meadows around us, like some herbal tea. And so the space has just become like a space for the community and what our community needs. So it's not just a secondhand store. Is what I'm trying to say. It's kind of been shaped to serve the needs of our community. We happen to have a lot of ski waste, and like an example of one of the good services is that we have a rail outside the front of the shop for children's clothing, and all that children's clothing is just free. It's swap or take or drop off. Because like I've got 2 young children, and if they wear ski gear for a season, chances are, well, by next year, so Noah's free. He's just done it. He's just been skiing this winter at ski school. By next year, he will have grown. He's nearly grown out of it by the end of the winter. But he will have grown out of that ski suit that he was wearing. It's completely fine and totally. That's in new condition. It's a thick plastic ski suit. So I'll just go back on that rail, and hopefully someone will drop one on there that I can take for him to wear next season. So yeah, it's become that. And that's the story of One Tree Time, and it's based in our local village here, and it's just focused on servicing our community.
I mean, I think there's so much in there, and I think there's a lot of focus that goes on environmental sustainability. But what I hear is, the amount of social sustainability and how you've really created a space and a centre for community to engage in things like repair and reuse. And I don't really think that gets talked about enough. It's kind of like a side benefit to keeping things out of landfill. But I really feel it creates momentum and motivation around behavioural change to create those spaces and to connect those people. And just even thinking about, the rail of clothes outside for kids, we know sports like skiing and cricket are prohibitive to a lot of people because of the cost of kit, and just to remove that barrier and to get more diversity within sport is so important. But I also think it's ironic that a lot of these initiatives are run by people who are just fueled on passion and purpose. It's like you had this idea, you went and did it, you're able to fund it through the waste, that you see in your community, which in itself is, seems absurd. that actually all this stuff is being thrown out and there's so much value in that really wasn't being utilized before. And it took somebody like you to kind of be like, how could we reimagine this whole system? Like, it's a whole systems change that you've implemented. I'm intrigued to kind of dig into more around the reuse of those kind of ski clothes and what were the barriers around kind of reusing them as they were, why you had to repatch them, how that's kind of gone down within the community and within the businesses who are donating those.
There's one bit I'd like to just touch on there, actually, in your question that we said there is, I think when I started out doing this, and it did event, like, we'll probably come on to reaction, which is another complicated, longer part of this story. When we started reaction, which I come on to, the thing it did say on the website at the first was keeping outdoor gear out of landfill. And that was our tagline, and that's now changed because I've come to realise that isn't really what we're doing. That, like, is part of what we're doing, but actually the power and the change needs to come from each of us, like, changing. Like, I just don't see a way forward where, we change the feedstock material to ski gear and the whole thing's fixed. Like, it's just not going to happen. So it's continually morphing into, like, a community focused organization that is giving people accessibility to the outdoors. Now, we've had really, really, really big lift price increases here for locals. Another long story, but due to the way they were being paid and the way that the lift system actually is part of public transport. So we were receiving subsidised lift passes locally, and that's actually not legal under European law. So that we've lost that option, and that's really expensive if you've got a family, 2 adults and 2 children that want to ski. The increase to your lift pass prices is thousands of euros alone. And we've got all this material in our community that can just make that outdoors, that space slightly more accessible. And your point again about sort of diversifying that space is really, really important as well. Like, when I go skiing, it is not a diverse place. I think a big thing that I've kind of realised recently is it's really hard sometimes to take yourself out of your space and out of your head. But I grew up in the Peak District on an outdoor activity centre, and I've lived in the French Alps. So I look out the door and I can see that nature is changing with climate change, and I get it. And I like being outside gardening, for example. I've got dogs, I'm walking the dog all the time. I love running, skiing, and I kind of assume in my brain that everyone else sees the world like me. But obviously, of course they don't. If someone's born in a city, they've just got no way of reconnecting, or they won't be able to reconnect or connect with nature in the same way that I am. There's a lot of barriers in the way to get to that place, and one of them is cost, for sure. But I think it is really, really important that we do provide that way to kind of access the outdoors and reconnect, because personally, I've kind of done that since I've left the ski shop more and more. Like, I've actually sought that out. And you might think, like, because of where I live, because of where I grew up, I'm super connected to nature. But actually, I think when I was working in that ski shop for 10 years selling stuff, I kind of got disconnected from it a little bit. And actually, what I'm actively doing now is trying to seek out more time in nature and spend more time there, because I learn so much just by witnessing it. So when I step outside and see nature, like, nature is outside is extremely complex and really difficult system, and, like, there's loads going on, but somehow it balances out. And I kind of think it's really important to kind of connect again with nature, to just try and understand that a bit. Like, complexity, I don't see complexity as a bad thing. I don't see mess as a bad thing. I see those as the spaces where we can get creative. So, like, our community space down here is pretty messy. It like there's a lot going on. There's a lot of different strings, a lot of different factors. You're not going to find the same piece of clothing ever again in that space, because a different person's patched over the logos, a different person has done the repair. And so you go in and it's just like, it's similar to nature. It's just kind of like organic. Like, if someone picks up a piece of jacket, someone takes a jacket that needs a patch putting on, for example. So when we get the ski gear in, it needs a patch sewn on. Like, I encourage the different people to do the patching to just patch it in their own style, like however they want to do it. Like, there's no pre-described. This is how we do a one tree patch. Like, get the fabric out of the fabric boxes, because we one of the things we did when we first set up the space is we said we wouldn't buy any materials because there's so many materials already here in our community. Let's use the waste fabric for patching. Get some out there, go to town, do whatever you like, and that just means people are doing their own thing that they're enjoying and they're really creative. Some people like to patch and make it look like the patch is not there. Other people, like Stu, who's self-taught, likes to just draw. Like, so he's almost drawing with a sewing machine. Like, stuff's going everywhere. Like, what we're doing, like a localized community ground up level of everyone just trying different things and seeing what fits in our community. Like, not what fits here isn't necessarily going to fit in every other community. And I think I'm not from the clothing industry in any way, shape, or form, but I've sold some clothes, and I'm now involved in trying to keep some clothing in our community in use. And when I look at the wider outdoor clothing like producers and brands and stuff, I just find it so boring, so plain, and like a rehashing of the same thing. And I think by doing that, we're just missing out on so much joy and opportunity to do something fundamentally different, which involves your community, involves your friends, involves your neighbour, involves art, like involves skills. And that's kind of what we've seen grow out of that one tree at a time space.
God, I love that, Gavin. And just hearing you talk, I don't know whether you are neurodiverse or you class yourself as that term or not, but a lot of people who I speak to are very linear in their thinking. They're very much like, here's the problem, here's the solution, here's what we know exists and how to get there. And what I love when I listen to you is actually it's looking at it in a very holistic way, and like looking at systems and how things interconnect and what's relevant for certain circumstances and how that applies or doesn't apply, and actually looking at things that are quite different, say like nature, and learning what you can from that versus taking an economic model and trying to change it. And I feel there's an absence of these types of voices within this space. Everybody wants that solution and they want a nice, neat kind of silver bullet to solve this. And I really like the fact that you're kind of saying, that's probably not going to happen. There's not going to be one solution to this. And there's many different facets to it. And a lot of it is about kind of looking externally to nature and also connecting that to something fundamentally within us that is brought together by community. And one of the things that I kind of struggle with is, when you think about climate change, it can be quite full of despair, and it can take away our agency because we kind of think, what can we do as individuals? And I like how you kind of said, reaction, it's not about saving things from landfill anymore. It's about creating community and what can we do as individuals. But I don't know whether you've ever kind of come across that as feeling like you're a different thinker and actually kind of coming to the table and kind of saying, this is how I approach it. And kind of people have found that refreshing or not. I'm just interested in that side of it because I work a lot in education. I work a lot with neurodiverse thinkers. And actually those to me are the voices that I find most innovative at the moment because they're coming at things in a completely different way.
I don't think I'm neurodiverse. I don't. Not that I know. But I think the way that I think has come from my upbringing. So, like, I lived in the Peak District. I lived on this outdoor activity centre that it was over a mile away from the nearest next door neighbour. It was actually the highest inhabited house in England. So it's quite isolated. It was then 15 miles away from the nearest village, which would have been your nearest shop, which would have been like a corner shop. And so I don't think I had much attachment to buying and owning stuff, like all through my childhood. Like my mum used to make, especially when I was younger, up to about the age of 7 or 8, I've got 2 brothers. She used to make all our clothes. She used to buy the fabric and make them. And we'd all be in exactly the same, the 3 of us would be wearing exactly the same clothing all the time. Like we'd be dressed up. But I don't think I had that connection with the sort of shopping for stuff. And then outside of, like, in my life at the time, we lived in this outdoor centre, like I say, and all the time, each week, new groups would come through. Each weekend, each week, I'd meet new people who would leave the following couple of days. Me and my brothers would just spend most of the time outside. Like, that's what we do. Like, there was no roads anywhere near because it was the end of a track, so you could literally go for hours without coming across anything else, and it was a safe place to grow up in that sense. And then I moved here to the Alps, and again I'm in a space now where there isn't a clothes shop for me to go and buy some new clothes from. So I kind of think, like, I guess I thought around a lot of these, like, buying new stuff has never been easy for us because of, like, physical barriers, because of where we live. So I think you probably, because of that, spend a bit more time thinking about buying something or finding your way around it. And, like, where I live here right now, like, no one cares. I don't care what I wear. No one else cares what I wear. Like, if there's a hole in my trousers or they're dirty, the type of place I'm living, like, no one's really that bothered. And so maybe it's that education, and I say the word loosely education because I think most of that education probably happened outside of school, but probably the most impactful bits. So I think it's maybe that's maybe asked me to question stuff, because I'll be outside in the garden this afternoon. Need to do there's a bit of pruning to finish off. I need to finish some walls, the wall that I was building. But the whole time I'll be like, there's lots of nature around me and lots of stuff going on. There's lots of birds in the bird nests, for example, at the minute. There's a lot of black fly on the elderflower tree, and the ladybirds have just started to arrive. So you kind of see how all these different things happen, and they're all interlinked, and they're all kind of going on. But they're not, like, clearly defined, like, oh, this needs to happen. Like, it's just happening in a sense. And that's what I think is really is where I kind of feel like the outdoor industry and the clothing industry has almost got itself into a pickle, because it's just like, it's assumed that there's lots of choice now. There's a lot more choice. There's a lot more option, but actually it's just really the same thing repeated. Like, all right, it might be, like I say, a different shape or a different color, but it's essentially it's manufactured in the same place, part of the world. It's transported in the same way. It's put on display in pretty much the same way. It might look slightly different, and it might give you your own, it's a bit of fashion, a bit of style there, but, like, it just doesn't feel that exciting or innovative anymore. And so maybe I don't know. It's an interesting. I don't know if I've not always thought this way as well. Like, when I was working in the ski shop and owning the ski shop, I was definitely not thinking like I am now. And I do think the influence of, like, climate change, having 2 young children is coming into that, is influencing me now. It's making me go, what could I do? What could I get involved with? And then what's kind of, you touched on, is kind of addictive, is the way that we're doing stuff in our community here. It's, like, fun, and you're involved, and it's creative, and that's kind of addictive. Like, you kind of want to get on to the next, like, do the next thing. You want to keep going. Like, you're like, oh, this is exciting. It's not this, like, oh, I've just read an article about how the next football t-shirt I'm going to buy, for example, is going to be made from another football t-shirt. Like, great, but that's not something I'm involved with. Like, I can read about it and I can be like, well, that's kind of cool, but I'm not playing a role. I'm not part of that. And I think, like, what we started doing here, you are part of that, and that's exciting. And you kind of want to just keep getting involved and keep doing more. I don't know. Definitely in the last 3 years, I've developed more of a skill at thinking through a systems approach, or thinking what, like, doing one thing might affect another thing. And I don't know where that's come from, or I don't know why I seem to be able to do it. Like, I seem to be able to do it quite well all of a sudden. I don't know why. Like, I kind of look at something and go, well, I'm not, like, someone will go, oh, look at this is great, and I'll be like, I'm not sure if that's quite going to have the effect that we think it's going to have. And like some of that might be being involved in the space and just seeing how much waste there is, like getting to see it physically on the ground and working with it, so that you just kind of come to understand in your head that actually we need to make a lot less stuff. Like it doesn't matter if we make it from a different fabric or we make it in a slightly different way. We just need to make a lot less stuff. And I think maybe that influences it a bit as well.
And I know before we kind of start recording, we talked about kind of shifting from these models and kind of saying, but how do you kind of embrace them in terms of like scalability and the fact that these bottles aren't going to look the same as what we already know, and thinking about how those measurements of what we kind of use to describe impact are, like that conversation around, there's a lot of great work happening in the space. A lot of it is run by like passion and purpose, volunteers, and it's kind of pushing the boundaries on what needs to happen. But it's how do you quantify that impact for things like funding and to keep it economically sustainable to keep going. So I'm just kind of intrigued by that, and intrigued to kind of learn a bit more about reaction as well, and how that's gone, and how you kind of look at the measures of success of that, for example.
Yeah. Difficult question to answer, actually. Like one I think I'm kind of working through at the minute, because like with everything that we've done, both at One Tree and Reaction, which I'll just come on to explain in a second, like we've not been, I wouldn't say, because we're so busy, like everyone working on it's focused on doing stuff. Like I enjoy going down to the studio and doing some screen printing. I enjoy going down and doing some repair. Like we're not super focused on recording that impact. I also would question, like you sort of question there, how like do we record that impact? It's kind of difficult to do. And so at the minute, I don't know. I feel if someone said to us, right, here's some funding, we want to know the carbon impact saving of what you're doing, I feel that would almost constrain what we're doing. And actually, I'm not sure I'd want to accept that funding, even though we really need some funding. Because I think that's not the measure. Like that would just put us into this thing where we're like, wow, we've got to measure the carbon impact of what we've done, or we've got to measure the amount of kilos of waste we've kept out of landfill, and that's our sole focus, and that's what we've got to do. If we do that, then we've sort of lost all the joy of the creative part of it, and we've sort of lost that, really. So I think it is a really important question on how we measure the impact of the things that we're doing, and kind of why we're measuring them, sort of for what purpose. What's your thoughts on that? Like, how do you see that?
I think for me, and I've spoken to a couple of people about it, everybody loves data and a spreadsheet, but I think we get to a point now where we're not moving forward because we're spending a lot of time trying to measure data, and it's actually a barrier to progress. And the most successful things that I've seen, especially at grassroots, are like behavioral changes in terms of, getting people active. So there's an organization called Play It Again Wales. And she was like, we measure impact by the fact of like who turns up to our walking group. Like we started with 2 people and now we've got 12. And some of those people have really difficult lives, and they have a lot of issues that they've got to deal with. And the feedback from their friends and family about how their life has changed because they were able to be part of this community. And the fact that, we now have somebody to say hi to as we cross the road, you can't put a price on that. And I think it's that kind of qualitative measurement that we don't really value. And to me, those are the most important things. Like, it's like trying to measure your carbon. Most of it is quite inaccurate anyway, especially like as you kind of go down the different scopes. When you get to scope 3, I think a lot of the time it's to finger in the air. And I think it does restrict what people are doing because they're doing it because they just need to have a measurement. And for me, it's about, are we improving lives? Do we create social value? Is what you're doing having a purpose and an impact on others? And, in everything that you've talked about today, it's really been centered around community, whether that's a physical space where people can come to, whether it's teaching skills, whether it's just almost like showing people another way in terms of things like repair or like repatching. But I think sadly for funding bodies, that isn't convincing enough to get cash passed over. And to me, I think that's a real problem.
Mm. Yeah, I'd agree on the funding as well. And like for the funding as well, some of the applications and stuff take so long to do, and they're spread over such a long time, that it actually makes it quite difficult. And I think if I go on to describe like reaction, so reaction basically is a collective. So one tree at a time was going really well, and I was on another podcast and they said, "Oh, how can you scale this?" And I didn't want to open up lots of one tree at a time stores for various reasons. One being I didn't want that to become my life again. I didn't want to go back into managing all these different spaces. But then probably the most important is I don't believe taking one tree at a time and even putting it in the valley over from us is the right way to go. I think the valley over from us should create whatever's important to them. So we started to create this collective, which is now a collective of 40-ish organisations based all over the globe that are working to keep outdoor gear out of landfill, but they're also building community. They're teaching people how to prepare. They're sharing ideas, and we're effectively working collectively to try and create a kind of a new system. And it's really fun. And I think, but that space, that reaction collective, is myself and Heather co-founded it. We don't call ourselves co-founders. We call ourselves the stewards now. Like we talk ourselves as stewards. Like that space is something that we've created. That our role really is just to be stewards, and we kind of sit. Like we communicate through Discord, and when we're on that Discord channel, like my voice is as relevant to everybody as everybody else's voice on that channel. Like there's no hierarchy in power. There's no one else to say over anybody else. And so we've created this space which is quite free to go where it needs to go. Great examples are like we've been doing the patching, and I was speaking to Michael, who runs Pre-Loved Sports. He does a lot of work with secondhand sports gear, like just keeping that out of landfill and giving people again accessibility to sports. And he was chatting to me, and he's like, "Well, I've got all these like T-shirts that have got like something on them, like from a marathon race or from an event." And he's like, "Do you reckon we could just heat press over them?" And I was like, "I don't know, we'll give it a go." And I said, "I've got some funding. We'll buy your heat press. We'll give you some money. Have a crack." And so he had a go at it. And he's been heat pressing over these old logos and maybe putting the reaction logo on it, or putting the Pre-Loved Sports logo on it, and just like investigating how that could work. And he's then passed it on to another member who runs running events, and what they're doing is they're going to start turning up at their running events with the heat press. So rather than buying a T-shirt for each event, you just come along and you can have that event heat pressed onto your running vest. So you can start collecting different badges at the events and stuff. So just testing ideas like that, and that space, because it like we've built Reaction without any funding, and it's just had a lot of, like, as you sort of said, a lot of volunteer time and a lot of people putting a lot of effort into it. And that to this point I think it's been really useful, because it's meant that we've been able to create whatever we feel is necessary, or whichever direction this is taking us. If we'd have got some funding 2 years ago that was very prescriptive about what Reaction needed to do, say that funding might have been around keeping gear out of landfill. It might have said, right, we need this funding. We need to keep as much gear out of landfill as it is. We might again have got obsessed and stuck in that point where we're going, right, we just got to keep stuff out of landfill, which isn't what we do that. But there's much more, many more layers to what we're trying to do. And I think funding can be it's obviously really useful. And we're at a stage now where we do need funding, because Reaction is working really great. It's a really cool space. There's 4 of us working on it around all our lives and stuff, and actually all 4 of us would absolutely love to work on it full time, because we think we can create something really, really quite special. And we do need to secure the funding so we can make this thing even bigger and keep going with it. But Back to your like conversation about funding, it's really difficult. Like, it's really kind of quite hard to sort of like sell an idea that's basically around habit changing. Like, what we're going to do here is we're going to encourage more people to repair. We're going to encourage more people to use. We're going to get them to basically consume less. Like, you can't turn that too easily into a business and make some money from it. And yeah, it's something that you kind of, at the minute, the only way I can see for it to continue is to get grant funding, which, like, as I've just said, can be both restrictive if you don't get the right kind of fund, but also can take a long while to get and quite difficult to get.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also thinking about all of the like unquantified benefits as well that have a cost that aren't incurred because people are able to be part of this community. I know some reuse organisations have talked about that before, but things like mental health, because you reduce barriers to sport and people can play, and mental health benefits from having that sense of community and less pressure on things like in the UK NHS, for example. And I just think we know they exist, but we never try and quantify that in terms of kind of offsetting those costs. And something that I wrote down was, one of the most valuable things that I'm hearing is that how do you create a sense of community? Like, you have connected out really kind of across so many different parts to these change makers who are able to implement change that's relevant for them in their own community. I thought it's really interesting how you said, I'm not just going to kind of plant this in another area and hope it works and kind of put that solution there and kind of assume that's going to be right. Actually, you've sought out people within that community and kind of done a bit of like a knowledge share or an exchange or a meeting of minds to kind of share that experience, but not to push on them your way of doing it. And I think that's quite special. It's a new type of leadership for me, of kind of saying, let's like come together, share the knowledge, but actually you do what's right for you.
One of the very, very important things that happened at Reaction is when we first started out. So me and Heather were discussing, like, we're just like, let's go with this. It sounds pretty cool. Let's create a collective. We already knew like 5 organisations that we thought would want to get involved. Let's just start it. Let's not worry about funding. And then in the back of our mind, there was always this idea that the member organisations would pay to be somehow part of that, to be part of that collective, like they pay like a monthly fee, I think. But it always like nagged away at me that wasn't quite the right way to go. And the reason for that is, and it seemed like it started to realise that I wanted people to give to the collective rather than to think, oh, I've paid some money, like, am I getting enough each month from this collective? Like, as soon as you put that money there, it becomes really transactional. And actually, like, I want it to be a space where if you've gone, oh, I've had 3 or 4 months where I've been absolutely knackered, I've got loads of stuff going on at home, or I've got stuff going on at work, and I haven't been able to be involved with this collective, well, that's fine. Like, you don't need to feel guilty about that. That's completely fine. Like, we've all got stuff going on in life. I have to take months off at a time. But you can't always get involved every day, and you can't always be there. So you don't want to feel like, oh, I've given this money, so I have to be there, or I have to be getting something back. It's just a space. And like, if you can be in it and you've got something valuable to add, or you've got something that you want, you've got a question that you think someone might be able to answer, you can get involved in that. And that was really important. That just made everyone realize that this is a community, this is a space for us to come together, help each other out, and share ideas. And also, I think that by not funding it that way, and like, we still haven't figured out how to fund it, so it's difficult, but by not making that our funding route, that doesn't mean we've got to go and find 50 more organisations this year, like, to pay for this member stuff, or we've got to find this many. Like, it doesn't put that pressure on. So we just need the right organisations to come on board. Like, we don't have to go out there and say, right, well, you're kind of like Reaction, but, because basically with the collective, I think it's on our blog now, but on Instagram, the top pinned post is about is like a manifesto. It's like 8 different things that each collective member sort of can sign up, sort of adhere to. And basically, that is about repairing, reuse, circular economy, community, education, providing accessibility to the outdoors. Yeah, the space isn't really open to a brand or a manufacturer. It's more about like a community and trying to figure out things in a new and completely different way. So yeah, we've not got that pressure to say, right, we need to get this brand on board because we need this amount of funding to come in. We purposely really haven't made that the way that this is funded, and that's useful.
I mean, I'm gonna have to wrap up soon, Gav, but I could talk to you all day. But I just think there's so much in that last piece of what you said in terms of, whether you would call it leadership, but how that leadership has kind of evolved into what you make reaction. But to me, there is some really specific qualities that I see in that. It's a complete lack of ego, which you don't often get in leadership. Often it is about status. And what comes across is that there is no ego here. Everybody is equal. And there's a real, what I find is quite refreshing, is that vulnerability to be wrong. And I think as people who drive change or are leaders, often a lot of people look to you for the answers. And actually for you to say, I'm probably going to be wrong on this, or I'm going to change my mind on this, that must come from a place of confidence to be like, I'm okay with that. And the idea that actually taking that time to listen to everybody and giving them that time and feeling heard and making sure that everybody is equal, and really being kind of brought together around those aligned values and it not being transactional. I think there's something quite unique in how you've shaped this and the qualities, like those personal qualities that you brought to it, because I think it could be set up elsewhere and be driven in a very different way if you didn't kind of come from it from a place of, look, we're all in this together. There's no egos here. You leave those at the door. I just wondered whether you'd ever thought about that,
Yeah, I do think the space, maybe it's because of the manifesto, like there isn't any egos in the space. Like everyone that's come on board is really, really, like all those 40 organizations, they're amazing, made up of amazing people. Ellie, there's a young girl called Ellie, she's 18 and she does some work with us. She just got in contact, said, love what you're doing. And she wrote this incredible speech about how she's feeling as an 18-year-old. And it's quite hard to read, but every time she goes, so we actually paid for her to go to Change Now in Paris. And she's met up at a few of the different events that we've held and stuff with all the members. She should be the first to say she's a little bit nervous before going to the event. And then she just comes away and she's like, I can't believe how lovely everyone is. And they just genuinely are. Like, and I don't know whether it's just the nature of what we're doing or what people are doing in that space. But yeah, like it's crazy. So it's crazy to see how much everyone is invested in just helping each other out. So like you go on the Discord channel and it's just, I've got this question, what does everyone do over here? Like what, like example, what are you charging for a price? Like I'm a repair aide, I do repairs. I would be, you perceive me as like the world will perceive you as my competitor, but I'm not interested in competing with you. I'm interested in competing with the entire system. So the only way for us to do that is to do that collectively, not individually. So I feel like everyone in that sense is just happy to muck in and help each other out. On the question of being wrong, I mean, we're all going to be wrong, aren't we? Times will change.
Yeah, but most people don't admit that though, Gav, though, do they? Most people are like, no, I was still right.
Yeah, but I think at this time, I always feel at this time, if I'm not wrong in a year's time, if reaction hasn't changed that much in a year's time, if we've stood still, like I feel like we've stood still and then we've not gone anywhere. I feel like actually I kind of need to listen in a year's time and go, oh yeah, that was a bit of a daft idea. Like glad we stopped doing that and we started doing this, because otherwise I feel like we're just stuck in the same place, because we need to change our habits. We need fundamental systemic change, and that involves changing everything.
I think what a great note to finish that on, Gav. Really inspiring, I think, in so many different ways in terms of, like I say, leadership, community, there's a lot in there around failure. Some people would be like, well, if I'm not right, I failed. But actually it's about looking at things in a different way. And just the, where you talk about it, to bring joy and enthusiasm to a topic that can be quite hard, and to reframe it, I just think it's awesome. But just want to say thank you so much, Gav. It's been such a good conversation. I've learned so much, and yeah, can't wait to speak to you again soon.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. It's made me rethink a few things, so I'll be thinking differently next week.
I'm intrigued to come back in a year's time and see where you are with this.
Yeah, that'd be great.
See what you thought you were wrong on, in a year's time.
Lots.